were dancing.
We're dancing.
I was forcing her to dance. She was not very natural, let's say.
Okay.
Hasn't quite gotten her groove yet.
She got her groove going. Oh, that's a great way to start. Yeah, so we are back here for a Think and Link on an abnormal day at a normal time, and with an amazing pair of guests. We have Mauro Porcini and his very new daughter as our guest. She's not going to stay the entire time, as I understand it. She might have to leeve.
I mean, I'm not that busy, but she's very busy. So she's very busy.
She's got. I love it. I know. Plus, we're not going to be able to concentrate on anything except for her. That includes the audience. I'm certain of this. Anyway. So we do this event as a gift to our community of thinkers and doers. We put amazing guests on the stage to have a conversation about their books, about what they're seeing in the world, leaders in design, innovation, brand, and marketing. And we I don't know what else to say about it because this is the first baby. And Mauro's been on this Think and Link before. He's done this, but last time he had to do it from his car because the Wi-Fi was so harsh. And so now at least we can see the inside of his house. And we've got a second guest, which I'm going to not be able to stop talking about. Anyway, this is brought to you by Capsule. We are a special projects firm here in Minneapolis, and we do a lot of work in the area of brand, design, and marketing. We have worked with Mauro in the past and his team back in a Super Bowl event. And, of course, do a lot of work for brands like Patagonia, Arc'teryx, Hydro Flask, Curaleaf, and a variety of others. And my co-host, we have a guest co-host, Kitty Hart, who some of you might know because she was with us for a full decade, a big decade. Oh, yes. I've got actually some other piece of news for you all that's really funny that I'll share later about the history of Capsule. It'll be fun. But I'm going to hand it over to Kitty. She's going to do a little intro as to where she is now and why she's here. And then she's going to ask the first question of our guest, Mauro, and guest and plus one.
I am Beatrice.
Take it away, Kitty.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to co-host today. I appreciate it very much. You and I, we started, I was with you when Think and Link was created when we first moved into the North Loop. So I'm always thrilled to co-host and always thrilled to be able to have conversation with you, Mauro. So excited to be co-hosting today from the world headquarters of Heroic Productions, which is where I am these days. For the past 19 years or so, we've been producing in-person, virtual, and hybrid events, mostly for large corporations. Everything from strategy and creative. We book top-tier speakers and entertainment and complete run of shows. So it's a really, really active industry right now, and we could not be more thrilled to be a leader in this specific form of experiential marketing. So, Mauro, always good to see you.
I'm sorry, Kitty.
Is she giving me the bubbles? Is she giving me the bubbles?
Serious. No, she's super excited about the mic. She discovered the mic.
She's super excited. Whatever Kitty would say was very interesting to her.
Excellent.
And the microphone.
Good.
This is our first baby. It's our first baby on Think and Link. Well, maybe some of our past guests have been babies, but we're not going to talk about that. Really, that's just
in another way. Yes. So I don't know. I can't see numbers. I don't know who's joined already or who's with us. Welcome to everyone who is jumping in. We are streaming this on LinkedIn and Facebook. You're going to be able to pick this up in a lot of different places. So many of you know Mauro already. You have become a legend. We are proud to say that we knew you when you were here at 3M, one of the first chief design officers that I met anyway. So I'm going to kick us off with the first question. We are really excited about your new book that is soon to launch. And the book is called The Human Side of Innovation: The Power of People in Love with People. Really intriguing title. So I want to talk a little bit about that love word, because that's a word that we don't talk about a lot in the corporate world. And I think that you make some really interesting connections between love and innovation. So could you kick us off with a little bit of Let's bring those two words together because they connect in a big way.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be again together, and in a completely different way. When we connect, when I was in Minneapolis, I was a very different person. And then there's been this incredible journey. One of the reasons why Beatrice is with me today is not just a practical need that she needed to be with me in this specific moment, but I think she's also the embodiment of the person that I am today and the person that wrote that kind of book. I couldn't have written that kind of book without the journey that I had and in all these years. And for sure, the time I was in Minneapolis, that's for me is the time I moved from Italy to the United States. And everything that happened in my life in the past 12 years since then is been somehow shaping my mind. And as Steve Jobs would say, help me connecting all the dots of what happened before. Now, yes. I'm going to give Beatrice to Ezra. Thank you so much. Ciao, Beatrice. See you later. Ciao.
Bye.
Talking about love.
Yes.
The book starts with this sentence: innovation is an act of love. And what I mean is that if you think about what innovation initially was, the idea of taking something and changing its status to create value for people, for yourself, for your community, eventually later on for society. So changing the status quo, something that is out there, and transforming it in something else. Well, innovation was the very first time that innovation happened in the world, in the life of people, was by definition an act of love. Thousands of years ago, the prehistoric man or the prehistoric woman, when they took something was available to them in nature, and they decided to manipulate it, to change the status of that something, to transform that something, and that something was a stone, what was there was a stone, in something that they could use to fulfill a specific need. That's the first act of innovation. They took a stone, they transformed the stone first in a tool for hunting, immediately after in a tool to prepare their food, and then later on in tools to decorate their bodies, and then later on in tools to celebrate their gods, and a variety of other things. But just in these different dimensions, I summarize all the different needs that somehow thousands of years later Maslow decodified in his pyramid. From the bottom, the physiological needs, the safety needs, to the center, the sense of belonging, the connection with other people, self-expression, all the way to the top, transcendence, something that is bigger than us. So from the very beginning, the very first time that somebody, a woman or a man back then, decided to change nature and innovate, they did it for specific needs. And if you look at all these needs, the combination of all these needs together, when we fulfill all those different needs, we reach what we call today happiness. When we fulfill all the different needs, finally we're happy. And our life is a journey towards that happiness. So back then, innovation was an act of love for these people towards themselves and the people they were serving. They were creating these tools for their families, their close communities. The idea of family didn't exist as it is today, right? They were small communities. And so they were literally helping themselves and their communities in a variety of different ways by the creation of these products. Then they started to create more and more products. At a certain point, you couldn't create by yourself all the products that you needed because they started to be too many. And so what did you do? They started to delegate the creation of these products to somebody else, to other people. In a pact of love, the idea was, you create that product for me because you really care about me. You really want to help me. I'm going to create something else for you because I really care about you. And in close communities, that was pretty obvious. The problem is that then they started to organize themselves in broader communities, in cities, and they started to invent the idea of work and organize all of this. And then later on, we start to have the idea of companies and brands. And we scale, with the scale of this innovation, came something else. Everything moved from the human interest, the love act, to the financial interest, to the search for profit, extracting profit out of the act of love. So innovation at that point was all about, it started to become the creation of something for other people that is good enough as far as I can extract as much profit out of it. This is how our economy is driven today. We are surrounded by a series of average products, average brands, that create a lot of profit for companies that put them in market and drive them and grow them. What is happening, though, in the past few years, that all of this is dramatically changing. We are living in a world where essentially anybody today can come up with an idea, get easy access to funding through platforms like Kickstarter.com or through the proliferation of funds hunting for the next big idea, for the next startup. We live in the age of the startup. And today, if any of the people listening to us in this moment have an idea to build a startup, it's not that crazy to think in a way as eventually it would have been 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's more normal to think you can build a startup. Actually, we have so many people getting out of school with the dream of building a startup versus the dream, as you used in the past, of working for a big agency or for a big company. So we live in that kind of world. The cost of producing that idea is going down, driven by globalization and new technologies. And then mostly you can go straight to your end user to sell them products through the e-commerce platform and to promote your ideas through social media. Well, in all these dimensions, the big companies of the past were building their big barriers to entry, made of scale of production, distribution, and communication. Now, all of a sudden, the big and the small are competing with each other. And we know, any big company knows that there are millions of people out there thinking, how can I take down the brand, the product right now? What is the weakness of that brand and the product? And it's enough one area of weakness. You may have the perfect product, the perfect brand, and the perfect service, but they are not sustainable enough. You're not healthy enough. You're not personalized enough. That's exactly where the next startup will come in. And so the next startup by itself eventually may not be relevant enough to compete with a big corporation. But the summary of many of these new products, new brands, and new entrants are going to create products to these big brands and big companies. Sometimes in terms of market share, often and always in terms of relevance, mind share, love share. And so once again, the big and the small are left with just one option, refocusing everything they do in deeply understanding the human beings in front of them, the people in front of them, the needs, the wants, the dreams, the frustration of all these people in all the dimensions, and create extraordinary solutions in all the dimensions, the best product, branding, service, anything needs to be extraordinary for these people. Essentially, we are recovering the love that we lost for hundreds of years. We are forced to reconnect with people and create something that is extraordinary for them. And this needs to be driven by love, by people inside these companies that are really thinking, okay, I care about this individual. I care, like Beatrice, like my daughter that was here with us at the beginning of the call. It's different to design for Beatrice than to design for thousands or millions or billions of people out there. Or shouldn't be? Should it be instead exactly the same thing? Should we care for those millions of people out there in the same way I care about Beatrice, so that I want her to have the best products and the best food and the best beverage and the best services and the best experiences? The good news is that today, these companies are forced for the first time in hundreds of years to think again in this way, to get love back into the equation, because your barriers to entry don't let you protect any form of mediocrity anymore. And even if your mediocre product or brand is still out there, it's a question of time. There will be a startup sooner or later will arrive and they will disrupt your industry, your market, your product category. So it's better that you, company, disrupt yourself before somebody else does it on your behalf.
Wow. And that's what you refer to as human-centered design.
Yeah, that, by the way, is pleonastic. And redundant. Design is human-centric by definition, but you're right. I often talk about human centricity in connection with design, human-centric design, or human-centric innovation, just as a reminder. But any form of design is and should be human-centered. This is what they taught us at school. This is what drives us. If you think about the difference between the design professional and the business professional, and start with the education we receive. So when you are at school, they teach you to create amazing solutions for people. They teach you to study people, analyze their wants and frustration and needs, and then create the best solution for them. It could be a product, it could be a brand, it could be a piece of clothing, it could be a service. It depends on what you're studying, your specialization in design. But in general, what satisfies you, what you can brag about with your friends, what drives your career inside these organizations is when you create extraordinary solutions for people. You're like, yes, I created that, I did that. If you create something mediocre and is very successful from a financial standpoint, you're still a mediocre designer. You're not going to be an extraordinary designer if your product is mediocre and generates a lot of profit for your company. If you study instead business, well, they teach you how to take a business from A to B, how to grow a business. And they teach you that there are multiple levers to grow that business. One of them is called product. Then there is the promotion, the marketing, the multiple piece of the marketing mix. Now, even that idea is obsolete. But the point is that you have multiple levers. One of them is the product. But if you have a product that is average, and you don't have the possibility to modify the product in a profitable way, but you leverage all the other levers to make your business successful, you are a business star. You can brag with your friends. You grow in your career path. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that the designer is driving product quality, solutions quality, purposeful innovation with people at the center of everything. And then they think, okay, I also need to sell this stuff. Obviously, already at school, they teach us that you need that. But we believe that if we do the best possible, if we create the best possible product, we will also sell it because people will want it. The business leader instead is like, I'm going to grow the business. I could do it with an amazing product. And I'm sure that many, many people, working in the business world today, listening to this, are like, yeah, I am one of those. I want to create the best possible product. I don't want to put crap in the environment. I agree. There are millions of people like this in the business world. But in general, from a culture standpoint, starting with education, they teach you to grow the business. This is what is important for them. Now, why, and this is the reason why, until a few years ago, the business world didn't want to have designers in-house in the companies. For one reason, they didn't want to have designers in-house reminding everybody all the time that the product was not extraordinary. There was a potential, there was a gap, that the frustration of all these designers complaining that you didn't have the perfect solution for people, you could do more and more and more. They didn't want that. They wanted to do their thing, extract as much profit as possible from what they had, but then they also understood that innovation anyway is very important for any company. This has been always like this. But when they needed to innovate, at that point, they will knock the door of designers out there in agencies, in a variety of different ways, and be like, can you help us innovate? But the beauty of working with an agency without an internal team in-house was that if the agency was telling them, company, you should do things in a different way. Your product is not really ideal. If the agency was questioning the brief, the business team could be in the position of saying, you know what, agency, you're not doing what I need. See you, goodbye. Or eventually the agency, not to lose the customer, wouldn't challenge the company in the right way. Or what I saw happening endless of times, the agency will try to propose the right things, and then the company would butcher all those right things in their process. Butcher by what? By the culture of the organization, by the business model, and by the processes. And so this is why design, before being a project, before being an activity, needs to be a culture. And a design-driven company must have designers in-house It doesn't mean that you don't work with external firms. We have 300 designers in-house, and we work with hundreds of external firms. But the designers in-house are the ones that build the culture and infuse in the genetic code of the company this idea of human centricity first. I call the designers the ambassadors of the human beings in this company. And then they make sure that whatever idea, wherever it's coming from, it could come from an external design firm, it could come from an internal designer, it could come from an R&D leader or from a marketing leader, by the way. It could come from everywhere. That idea is protected all the way through, and you're taking the right compromises and trade-offs to arrive to market with integrity. And again, the big difference, though, between the past and today is that in the past, these companies didn't need extraordinary solutions because they could win with average products and big barriers to entry. Today, that's not possible anymore, and that's why you need not just designers in-house, you need marketers and R&D people and strategists and all the different functions to be creators, to be doers, to be innovators. You need a completely different kind of mindset. I call these people the unicorns, and this is the only way, and it's a very difficult transition for all these companies right now. They're passing through, from the past to the future, and they're in the middle of this evolution.
So, slight pause to make sure everyone has the link to go buy the book. Yes. If you're liking what you just got, I would highly recommend getting the book.
I have the only copy that I have is here.
Well, you can pre-order. You can pre-order, right? And it might even get paired up with the Physics of Brand, perhaps. Yes, definitely make a purchase of the book. This is amazing. So, innovation as an act of love, and the need to get back there. And I've been so curious since I saw the title of the book and started to, because I haven't seen a copy, I've not read the copy yet. Because obviously that's the only one, the probably the most valuable one, right? Because that's the one that if anybody gets their hands on it, it's going to become the legendary copy. But I would love to get deeper into this because there was a transition that happened in the industry of technology or in Apple computers world, which I want to make sure you tell your story, your Indra and Apple and Steve Jobs story for sure before we go too far. But there was a transition there that happened when it was less about the technology, more about the design, and more about the love of the person that was working with this technology. And I think all of us, if you had an iPhone or if you had any type of Apple device, when Steve Jobs died, you had an emotional response to his death. And the closest I was ever to him was his devices, right? Well, maybe by accident, I didn't even know it was in a coffee shop or something. But there is something incredibly elegant about tying innovation and love together, and that is an act of love. Love that. Love everything you just talked about. So if you could step back a little bit on how you made this transition from 3M way back when, 12 years ago, and how that all happened, because that is a wonderful story as well. And for those of you out there viewing, questions can be added to the chat, either on LinkedIn or Twitter. I think it's also on YouTube, wherever you want. Add questions. We'll answer as we can, though I don't think we'll have a lot of room for questions because this is going to be good. Mauro, if you don't mind going back a little bit into that story, because that's an incredible story, not elegant story.
My transition from 3M to PepsiCo, there are many angles to the story, so I'm not sure what of the multiple angles you're thinking of, but here I am. I never joined a company to stay in that company for a few years, do my next career step, grow, get more money, more fame, more title, bigger titles. I always joined these companies with the dream of leveraging their platforms to have an impact in the world. And somehow is the entrepreneur mindset, is the startup mindset, is literally looking at these companies as platforms that give you access to billions of people and a lot of resources to make things happen. And so I was at 3M, and I was having really the time of my life. It was really, really a lot of fun for a variety of different personal reasons. One of them being the fact that My wife was a fashion designer. She couldn't, and she was working for Yves Saint Laurent in Europe, and she couldn't find the job that she wanted in Minnesota in the high fashion industry. I started to consider other opportunities, people that were knocking the door and at my door, and the distance of one day from one another. In November of 2011, PepsiCo and Virgin, the Virgin of Richard Branson, and the PepsiCo of Indra Nooyi arrived. And I've been in conversations with both companies for a while, and then I decided to go for PepsiCo for a variety of different reasons. One of them being that essentially the company, well, let's talk about why I didn't go for Virgin. Virgin and Richard Branson, at least this is what the recruiter told me back then, was thinking about his legacy in that period. Because you mentioned Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs passed recently, back then. And Richard was thinking, okay, I need to build a legacy team at the center to take over Virgin as, the entire Virgin conglomerate, the entire Virgin company, in case I am gone. And so he started to build the marketing position, and he was looking for a design position. The problem with Richard and Virgin is that Richard Branson is the chief marketing officer of the company, the chief design officer of the company, and everything else. Is the soul of the company, is the driver of the company. And so at the end of the day, he never closed on that position. He decided to never hire that position. And even the CMO position that he built, it disappeared after a few months from our conversation. On the other side, I had instead a PepsiCo with a CEO that was really trying to evolve the culture of the organization, with a major commitment to reinvest a lot of resources in branding, hundreds of millions of dollars, announced to Wall Street. So a real commitment to change the organization, very public. And so it was a moment of transition and change where I could insert myself and design in a very meaningful way to help the Indra and the executive team of the company driving that change. I go to meet Indra and Brett Jakeman, back then the president of Global Beverage, in purchase, and I remember a few things that happened when I met both him first and then Indra immediately after. The first thing, as you mentioned, Steve Jobs, I went with the biography of Steve Jobs to the meeting, and the biography written by Walter Isaacson. And at a certain point, there is that part that many people know, where Steve Jobs talks with Scully, the former president of beverage of PepsiCo, the PepsiCo company, and essentially tell him something like, I don't remember the exact words, but do you want to keep working for a fizzy drink, or you want to come with me and change the world? And Scully leaves the company, goes there, he tried to change the world, and then he's not very successful in the company. We know how the story went. But I go there with this, and I tell both Brad and then Indra immediately after, I'm coming here to show to Steve Jobs, even though it was already, past back then, we all love Steve, that we can change the world also from a company like this, that we don't just do fizzy drinks, but we create stuff that go in the body of people, and we can, there is all the pillars of sustainability, health awareness, personalization. We touch the life of people every single day, millions of people every day. So we can do amazing things, leveraging design, through this platform as well. Let's work leveraging design to show Steve Jobs what we could do also in this kind of company. There was, something interesting that happened in my conversation with Indra, and I think she appreciated the boldness of the move of going with the biography to the interview. But the other thing that happened is that she had a dossier high like this, a very high dossier with essentially everything I did. they would prepare this dossier for her all the time she was meeting people. So she knew already everything I did in the design world, of my projects, my biography, everything. Probably she knew about me more than I know about myself. And very quickly, the conversation moved from products and brands and designing of all this stuff to design of culture. And I shared with her something that I was already sharing in conferences back then, that came out of an observation of what happened to me in 3M during those 10 years. In the middle of the journey, I looked back and I tried to decodify what was working and what was not working in the company. And now I've been building. I was successful in building somehow a design organization, a design culture, what was working, what was not. And I did it for myself because I needed a playbook to keep doing it in 3M. And then later on, of course, I would have joined any other company with a playbook to try to replicate that kind of approach. So I identified 5 phases that have the creation of any new culture, could be a design culture, but it could be any kind of culture, go through when you try again to build that culture. And this is what I share within. The first one is what I call the denial. When the company doesn't realize that they need something different and they keep doing what they used to do, and they're like, oh my God, this design thing, come on, we don't need it. If you don't realize fast enough that you need to change in a specific dimension, the company eventually end up risking its own existence. This is what happened with Blockbuster, with Kodak, and a variety of other companies that realized that they needed to change too late, but usually you have somebody in the organization that understands that you need that change. This person needs to be very high up in the company, a CEO, a top executive, for a simple reason, because it needs to be a person that is able and is enabled and empowered and has the resources to drive the change. If he's an entry-level employee, very often actually those are the employees that realize what the company really needs, because they come in with fresh eyes, a fresh perspective, but they don't have the power to make those changes. But usually an executive sooner or later understand that you need to change trajectory, because that's their job. That's why they're so well paid and they're up there in the organization, and they delegate the execution of this stuff to other people. Up there, they need to think, and they know that they need to think. So long story short, in the case of 3M, for instance, somebody decided at a certain point that they needed design, and they decided to invest in design in a very safe way, with a kid, 27 years old, to be hired in Italy, in the periphery of the American empire. So even if the kid was going to fail, nobody was going to realize. Working just on the consumer business, one of the 6 businesses of the company back then, just in Europe. So super, super, super safe bet. Very different than the bet of PepsiCo 10 years later. It was less safe, let's say, but it was also a completely different kind of time in history of design. But here they are, they hire this young designer, and the young designer takes his suitcase and he goes to St. Paul, Minnesota, and he starts to meet all these different R&D leaders and business leaders. And this young designer, does these meetings, and every single meeting goes well. It's amazing. I mean, everybody got excited, and I remember at a certain point going to the office of the EVP of the consumer business. His name is Dr. Monosari. That was the executive sponsor of design in the company, and he was the second most powerful person in the company immediately after the CEO. Very, veteran of 3M. I go to Mo and I tell Mo, it's phenomenal. Everybody is understanding this thing called design, what we're trying to do with design and the vision that we have. And I was really, really excited. And Mo looks at me. He was always very serious man. He looks at me behind his desk and he say, they're all lying to you. I'm like, no,
of course.
No. I was there, you were not there, they loved it. And then inside me, I was thinking, no, Mo, I have very high EQ, I understand people, you don't get it. And then Mose keeps looking at me, and then again, he says, I'm telling you that they're all lying to you. And then he goes on and he explains what he meant with the with an analogy. He told me, look, imagine you are in a gallery and there are multiple pieces of art on the wall, and you love one specific piece of art. You really, really, really love it, and you have plenty of money in your pockets. What do? Obviously, you buy the piece of art. So Mauro, you and design are one of the pieces of art in the 3M gallery. And I know that all these business leaders you talk with are not buying you, because I know that they're buying other pieces of art with the money that I gave them. And I know they have plenty of money, and they're deciding not to buy design, and they're buying the next HR project or the next plant, investment. And that advice or that story or that analogy changed completely my life, and probably is one of the things that made me successful in these companies, because it made me realize, first of all, that he was right. He was totally right. And so I was like, why didn't understand this? Well, why that happened? First of all, because people, they feel often uncomfortable pushing back on you, especially if they see in front of them a person with a lot of enthusiasm and they're pushing, things that they love, and you don't feel comfortable saying, well, that's great, but I don't care. The second reason is eventually that you don't want to go back somebody that has a big sponsor on his back or on her back. Or, it's possible that maybe they send me weak signals of the fact that we're not really interested. But we people, any person out there, we love to be loved. We don't like to think that somebody's rejecting us. So unless they don't tell us explicitly, often we don't see the weak signals, and we live in our thinking that actually we are accepted, we are loved. So long story short, I realized that many times when we pitch an idea, people are rejecting us, but they don't do it in an explicit way. I call this second phase the phase of hidden rejection. And it's indispensable in this phase to figure out who is rejecting you and who is not. And statistically, there is usually one person out of 10 is going to be with you. 9 out of 10 will be against you. It's not a number that I'm throwing there or based on my experience. This is coming from the curve of adoption of new products of any human being. We know that in general, when we are in front of a new product, 2.5%, 3%, I don't remember the exact data, are willing to try the new product before anybody else. They are the innovators of the world. Then there are immediately after that 10% that come after the first experiments and trials, the early adopters, but with them you go up to 12, 13%. So in average, you have 12, 13% of people willing to try something new. That's a product, but this is true for culture, for anything else. Everybody else come later. So the goal that we have when we try to innovate is to identify that person out of 10, or that 10, 11, 12% of people in a big organization that are willing to try new things with you. I call them the co-conspirators. And this is the third phase. When you essentially find these co-conspirators, I call this phase the occasional leap of faith. These co-conspirators are willing to take a leap of faith on you and try new things. How do you find them? It's very simple. And this is the technique that I developed after the meeting with Monosari. Essentially, every time you pitch an idea, you ask the person you're pitching the idea to, you ask the person for a sacrifice, a commitment. Ideally, you ask them for resources, money, people, starting a project with you. Worst case scenario, at least a public commitment, an involvement, so that people know that this person is connected with you to make things happen. If you do that, the most of those people who are so nice with you, they will tell you, you know what, I really, really love what you are saying, but it's not the right time. Now there is another priority, but we'll do it in a month or in 2 months or in 3 months, we'll do it. It's always like this. You need to find the ones that want to do it. When I joined PepsiCo, I mapped the co-conspirators with the HR departments. In one X, they were the co-conspirators. On the other X, they were the low-hanging fruits projects. Those projects where I could show the value of design very quickly. With them, you build the first proof points. This is what you do in the occasional leap of faith. You find the co-conspirators, you start to build proof points. The more proof points you have, the more people will want to invest in your ideas, because they're like, oh my God, I love what you did in Pepsi. Can we do it in Mountain Dew as well? And I'm like, yes, of course, give me the money. And if they're willing to do it, you start to be the critical mass of proof points. Once you have the critical mass, the company gets it. They are like, okay, there is value here. This is not just a pioneering activity, a fad, something is going to disappear. It's something we need to scale up to really build value for the company. And you move to the fourth phase, is what I call the quest for confidence, is when you move from startup mode to scale up mode, is when you need to take all those pioneering projects and those pirates that they were, the initial designers and marketers and R&D people that were driving those initial projects, and you need to add a layer of processes, tools, ways of working. And the problem in that phase is that often processes, tools, and ways of working kill intuition, kill initiative, kill love. And so the challenge of the quest for confidence is how to manage processes on one side and intuition and love on the other, to build confidence in the organization that new initiative is the right thing to do, and you need to take those risks that you're taking at that scale, at that point, to drive it through. And if you do it, you move to the fifth phase, that is the holistic awareness. This is the speech I gave to Indra when we met. I really think that is the reason why a PCG company, a packaging company, a brand kind of company, decided to hire an industrial designer coming from the tech industry to become their chief design officer, because Indra understood that what she needed was, before anything else, somebody that could help her and the other members of the executive team in redesigning culture, and then the design projects were a component of it.
This is, well, you should know that I did reach out to Indra to possibly have her come in here as another guest briefly, but she's in Indonesia. The time was not, perfectly matched up. This is like, whatever it is, 4 a.m. for her. So we are hoping to have her on as a guest in the future to talk about her book as well, because of that wonderful relationship you have. And I love that even after her retirement, you are still thriving and doing well, right? Because as the number one sponsor, you have embedded design into PepsiCo. It is there to live a long time, which I know is...
Actually, the fact that Indra and the current CEO, Ramon Laguarta, both decided to write the foreword for the book, I think is a statement of how much they believe in design as something that transcends the specific business leaders and the individual, but something that we infuse in the DNA of the company. And then obviously each CEO has his own vision, her own vision, and is driving design in a variety of different ways. But the fact that 2 different CEOs decided to write the foreword for the book, is a testament that the design is much bigger than specific individuals. For sure, is much bigger than Mauro Porcini, but probably is much bigger than any CEO, any executive team. It's something that needs to be infused inside the DNA of a company, and then the company drives it, no matter who is there. And that's why, for instance, when I left 3M, I told the company, look, I want design to succeed after me. I want to help you in all possible ways to write the right job description with the right title for the position. And once you find the person, I'm happy to interview the person and help you in all possible ways. And actually, Eric Quint wrote me, I didn't know Eric, but he wrote me an email. And he told me, look, I'm working in Philips and we have a common mentor, Stefano Marzano, and I'm interested in that position. Can you introduce me to the company? And so I introduced Eric to 3M, and I offered then Eric, my time while I was already in PepsiCo to help him, in any possible way. Then obviously Eric shaped design in the company in his own way with his vision, and it became, Eric's organization. And then they have a new CDO. New, now it's been for a while. But this is the beauty of what I try to do, and I hope many people will try the same thing, in what they do. building something that transcends yourself, that is gonna last after yourself. And why it's beautiful? Not because it's beautiful to say or it's a nice thing to say, but for a simple reason. When you succeed in doing something like this, essentially you're building legacy. And I close the book also talking about this. Legacy is nothing else than creating something that will transcend you, not just when you leave the company, but when you won't be in this planet anymore, when you will be gone. It's a way to defeat death. And in fact, in the Maslow pyramid is up there. Actually, Maslow introduced the idea of transcendence and something much bigger than you later in his life. It's the later version of his pyramid. In fact, many of the pyramids we find online today don't have that element because it came later in his life. But we arrive to the conclusion later in life, the idea of legacy, what is gonna stay after me. But many of us they have it intuitively inside. When you try to create something that is great and is bigger than you and is impacting the life of people, what we're doing from the very beginning, and we don't realize often, we're trying to defeat the very idea of death and becoming immortal through the legacy of what we do. By the way, and just to close, I'm not talking just about creating big design organizations or inventing the iPod. It could be multiple acts of kindness in your life, even if you don't work, in your community, with your family, with your friends. When I talk about legacy, I talk about creating something valuable that is bigger than you and leave a beautiful memory or some form of value in the society you're part of.
We have covered love and death and everything in between. I didn't think it was possible. I'm going to give Kitty a chance to ask the next question.
So here's what is continually swirling around in my mind on this topic. I want to make sure that for everybody who's tuning in and everyone who may be grabbing the book and having these conversations inside their companies, this is not just for global corporations. It's not just for companies who have the ability to have a chief design officer. How do companies that are 5 million, 10 million, how do they apply this thinking for their innovation and to their business? Because I think it's the word design. People get hung up on the word design.
Look, often the challenge is bigger in the big corporations because to embrace design in the right way can be risky. You touch a product that generates billions of dollars and this product is already successful is a big risk. And that's why often these companies struggle to innovate, because you try to protect the status quo, you don't want to screw up, or that innovation needs to generate value at scale. And so you need to invest, innovate, but if you don't generate a scale big enough through that innovation, is irrelevant to the company. So for smaller companies, the traditional definition of design, so the traditional approach to design has been easier to apply because essentially they saw in design a main competitive advantage and a main factor for this differentiation in their product solutions. But when I say traditional approach to design, I refer to design as form and function when you're lucky, or at least form, in some other situations. So aesthetic, beauty, the visual value of what you do across product, communication, packaging, branding, and experiences and everything else. The kind of design I'm talking about, though, is much bigger than that. It's what, at the end of the day, they teach us at school, to be clear. I remember I studied design in the Polytechnic of Milan, in the University Polytechnic of Milan. And back then, what they taught us could be divided in three main pillars. One is the human beings, how to create products and brands and solutions that are desirable. So we will study anthropology, semiotic, human science, so how to be an ethnographer, deeply understand people. The second dimension was the technological dimension. So starting actually from the basics of mathematics and physics, then material science, chemistry, all the way to the digital technologies that back then were just starting. So I remember I would study digital technologies, but literally without a computer, and designing these trees, to define the structure of a website and things like this. And then so this is the dimension of feasibility. And then the third pillar is the dimension of viability, the business world, branding, marketing, macroeconomics. So this is what we were studying back then. By the way, when I say studying, with books like this, with professors, because the university was very new. It was the second year of the very first design university in the country. All the designers of Italy before the university were coming from architecture or from non-university level schools. So it was the very first one. And because of this, we had teachers coming from business school, teachers coming from literature school, from engineering, for physics. And so they would come in and we will study on books like this with exams, so real study. And then every year for 5 years, we will combine the three dimensions, desirability, feasibility, and viability, or the human being, technology, and business, to solve problems of people, to create solutions to the needs and wants of people. We will partner with companies, big and small, and we'll work on projects of product design, of brand design, of service design, and so on and so forth. The only problem that we have as design community is that we call these projects design projects. Later on, years later, when I started to join these companies, tech-driven companies, brand-driven companies, I realized that any of these companies would call those exact projects innovation projects. We were lost in translation. And as design community, I think we did a very, very bad work in translating what we do in a way that is understandable, meaningful and relevant to the business world. Today, I remember, and I realized this with full clarity one day when I was talking with one of the heads of HR of the companies I was working for, and I told her exactly what I share with you now. I told her what we studied at school because she asked me, and she was surprised. And then I started to think, why is she surprised? I mean, it's obvious. That's what we study. She's the head of HR. She should know. And then I started to think, okay, let me think about what marketing studies or the business world studies. And let me think about what the R&D world studies. So from engineering to chemistry and biology, depending on what kind of research and development you have in your company. And I realized with full clarity, once again, that the only education in the planet preparing innovation people is the design education. Because if you study business, well, obviously you study the viability component, eventually you study the human science component, but probably you don't study all the technology components. You don't study physics or material science, or if you study engineering or if you study biology or physics, you study for sure feasibility. Eventually, you study the business component because in more and more schools, they're teaching you that as well. But there is a high probability you don't study human science and the mind of people and how, to sell them or sell them stuff or create meaningful products for them or talk to them and be a storyteller. So we designers, we are trained in what these companies call innovation. The problem, though, is that we get out of school and we enter the workforce, and in these companies, they don't understand, big and small, they don't understand what design is, and what do? They ask you to just work on styling, to just work on aesthetic features, to just work, eventually, if you're lucky, on the form and functionality, on ergonomics, so they will never ask you to work on innovation because they don't expect you to be an expert of this. And so many of us, 1 year, 2 years, 5, 10 years, after 10 years, after 15 years, you just forget everything you learn at school. Some of us, they're like, you know what? No, I can do so much more. And they're crazy enough to think that they can drive, that change. They challenge the system. That's what I did all my life, and at the beginning it was more difficult. Now I have more credibility, but at the beginning, here I am. I entered 3M and I'm like, no, design can do all of these things. And people would laugh and people would like, come on. So how do you make it happen? Well, give them what they are asking. So give them aesthetic, give them form and function when you're lucky. So work also on the full dimensions of the two, of functionality and aesthetic. But then behind the scenes, work on what you can really offer to those companies. So keep them happy with what they're asking you, so they keep you there, and then start to show real value, the real strategic value, the one that change the evaluation of these companies, the strategy of these companies, the culture of these companies. If I didn't do that in 3M, they would have fired me after a few years. If I didn't do that, even in PepsiCo, probably I wouldn't be where I am today in that company. Because people ask you certain things because they know what they know the status quo, they have a specific kind of understanding of what you can offer, but then it's up to you. And now I'm not talking just about design and designers. It's up to you, no matter what is your background, to understand what you can offer those people. And your job is not just the one of answering to a brief, to a job description, to something that they're asking you. Your job, and this is design thinking in action, by the way, is to challenge that question in your mind, at least. You don't need to challenge it explicitly because you may alienate the people in front of you. But ask yourself, why are they asking me to play that kind of role? For instance, when 3M asked a kid in Europe to play the role of design coordinator, that was my title at 27 for the company, I asked myself, why do they need design now in the consumer and office business? And they didn't need it 10 years ago. Why are they hiring somebody now? And you start to observe the fact that the consumer and office business, there were a variety of different companies that were starting to embrace design as aesthetic and creating dispenser of scotch and post-it or ergonomic appliances or lighting in the office environment or cleaning tools that had the design component. There was also, I would be forever thankful to Target. Target Corporation, co-located with 3M in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, was pushing the company 3M to embrace design. Bob Urich, back then, the CEO of Target back then, was on the board of 3M, and he was reminding Monosari, the consumer and office EVP, to embrace design and invest in design. So there were multiple things were happening. But the company was asking me, redesign a cute post-it dispenser, design a nice multimedia projector. If I was just doing that, if I was just designing those stuff, I would have lost, once again, 1 or 2 years. And they would have fired me for a simple reason, not because I would have failed, or simply because if I was just trying to if I was just trying to design beautiful products or beautiful and functional products without trying to change the culture of the company, I would have failed all the time. What was happening back then is that the world was starting to change. There were a variety of new entrants in the market. Design was becoming more and more relevant from an aesthetic standpoint in these kind of companies. Human centricity was starting to happen. And therefore, the company needed to change the way they were doing innovation, not just through a designer working on the aesthetic of the product, but it needed to change the way they were doing branding, the way marketing was thinking, R&D was thinking. It was much broader, much bigger. I needed to change the way people were rewarded in the business organization so that they could focus in design. They could build multi-year plans to change the products with a design-driven approach. I needed to work with HR, with the CEO, with a variety of different executives in reshaping the culture of the organization. But obviously, if I was telling this, first of all, I arrived to the conclusion by asking why, arriving to the root cause of why they were asking me to play that kind of role. I therefore essentially redesign my job description, but I was the only one knowing that. And then I started to build proof points. And then one after the other, at a certain point, the company started to connect the dots. And you know what happened, what really changed the game is when I moved to Minnesota, And Fast Company decided to make me Master of Design of that year for the magazine. And they sent a reporter to 3M. And this reporter spent a few days with me and interviewing the CEO and a lot of R&D leaders and marketing leaders. And there was this 6 pages article on what we're doing in the company. And the company, for the first time, looked at itself in a mirror. And they were like, wow, that's what we're doing. It's us, and Fast Company is celebrating this. So it must be amazing. That was powerful. The other powerful thing was target, realizing what we're doing and investing what we're doing, giving us a stage for what we're doing. And there is another story, but I'm gonna stop here, else it's a monologue. But Fast. So customers and media have been really, really important to build internal culture in these companies. So you asked me, about design in a small company. I took,
okay.
I heard a much broader story. I will stop here.
That's great.
Oh my goodness. I love that. I love that. Yes, we are pretty much out of time. But I do want to conclude and thank you for doing this, because this has been absolutely amazing. And I remember back when we originally met, we did a speech together at the Summit Brew House talking about design. And I remember talking to other people about the design department at 3M with you in it. And it was just such a fascinating perspective that you overcame. One, you're Italian, and there's a stereotype that comes with design in Italians. You're like, oh yeah, Italians are into design. But it wasn't the aesthetic. It wasn't just that. So you didn't dwell there. It was far beyond that. You went deep, and that changing the culture and that organizational change that came with your perspective on design. It has to be the center of your success. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, Aaron, you're mentioning something I think is important. I always try to extract a message that transcends a specific moment or episode. So imagine I am white and I'm a male, but I was diverse for that company. I mean, I was a completely different kind of breed of person, with my accent, with my style, coming from Europe and everything. And this could have been an advantage somehow in some way, but it was also a major disadvantage, not being able to really articulate myself in English properly. My English today is much better than 20 years ago. The fact that Italians, by stereotype, were messy, were not organized. And in fact, by the way, we're not very strategic in our culture. It's not what we learn at school process, and the way of working typical of Americans is something that is not embedded in our culture. So I think what I try to do all these years, and I'm still learning, is to understand in my diversity, what was valuable to these people? How can I find something that was powerful to them? And then understanding my diversity, what was not that valuable and actually could be perceived as a weakness. And now I could feel that kind of gap. My effort to understand strategy, to understand the business world, to build the vocabulary on that, to study, books over books, and conversation with tons of people, seeing all the business leaders that I will see in front of me as my MBA, as my teachers, and my opportunity to learn. That was about filling the gap that I knew as soon as I would enter a room, everybody would think, wow, this is a cool, stylish guy. But he doesn't really understand business. So the moment I start to talk about business in a way, that over time, probably I knew about business more than certain business leaders, all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, this is interesting because he brings his diversity, but he understands my world. And so you make diversity accessible. The problem of diverse people is that too many people fear what they don't know. They fear something that is different than them, but they fear it because they don't understand it. The moment you try to find a bridge, to create a connection, then they're like, wait a second, yeah, it's different, but it's also like me. And this is true now, I'm a privileged person. I'm white, male, I have it all. But if I think about the broader, real diversity problem, with real problems that have nothing to do with the ones I had that are a joke. In that case, I really have big hopes for the world we are living in now, but mostly for the future. We started this conversation with my daughter, Beatrice. You know, I'm looking at her. She's growing. She's born and she's going to grow in a world where we're all connected, where the idea of divisions and boundaries and countries makes no sense in the metaverse. When you go in a digital square, by definition, you're going to meet people with all kind of backgrounds and all kind of diversities. And this is what happened also in real life in cities like New York, by the way. You go out there in New York and you have so much variety and diversity of people that when you are exposed to that, immediately you understand that we're all the same. And we're all different in the meantime, but you are not scared anymore by people that are different than us. Now, the beauty of this digital world we're living in is that, thank God, even people that don't have the possibility to live in Manhattan, like myself, you know, I grew up in a little town outside of Milan with zero diversity in the town. So even people that grow up in that kind of reality, they have the possibility every single day of interacting with people that are completely different from them. So for me, it was going to be impossible that in 20, 30 years' time, when these people will be the leaders of the world, the leaders of our companies, we still not understand that diversity is the precious gift we can receive. Because in diversity, there is the gift of knowledge. There is the gift of a different perspective. And if you are an innovator, if you're curious, you want to grow, you understand that the more people different than you meet, the more you can learn, the more you can grow. You don't want to be in a bubble surrounded by people that think exactly like you, because you're sterile. You're not going to grow. And so I want to be optimistic, as these unicorns I talk about in the book, that we live in a world that is getting better and better and better just by the fact that we're more connected. There are less barriers to entering these companies. We are forced to put love at the center of everything, to create extraordinary products for people. And we're going to do it with a collaborative, collective effort, driven by this new digital culture that doesn't understand walls or boundaries or visas or countries.
Oh, man. Dude, you've done it again. We've gone, and I wasn't never going to interrupt that. I couldn't. And I know if we ask one more question, we'll go on another half an hour and with an enjoyable, amazing conversation. Thank you again for doing this a second time. And thank you for inviting along your guest. She was beautiful and amazing. If you were here late, you didn't see. Beautiful Bella.
I have another guest now that she's We open with Bella, we close with another Bella.
Ciao, Bella. Yes, wonderful.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, the other I don't know where it is, but
so and I'll just say one thing as we close here. On Facebook a week or so ago, or maybe a couple months ago, you wrote with regard to your sweet baby, in just 5 months, you already made me a better person, a better designer, a better leader. You are the most important design project of my life, the meta project that will give a new meaning to all other projects. We so look forward to seeing what is next from you. We look forward to the book, and it's always a pleasure spending time with you.
Thank you, Kitty, and thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Maura. That was amazing. That was amazing. All right, we will see
Thanks, everybody that joined us today.
Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.